So fellas, we're back in the Apex this week for another Women MMA main event. Potentially a title eliminator in the flyweight division as Erin Blanchfield takes on Macy Barber. It's just another Apex card. If I had to rate this card for a fight night, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. And that's kind of being generous to say that this is a lot. This match would be a contender for the worst card of the year. There's a couple of good fights in there. You know, the co-main event between Gamrot and Klein, that's going to be good. And there's a couple of other bangers, hidden bangers on the card, should I say. But overall, not the best card. But we're going to be breaking down every fighter as well as my own predictions. And we'll start off with Rayanne Santos versus Ardelean. You know it's bad when you've got two women who are both 0-2 in the UFC still competing in this organization. This is the definition of an Apex fight. You've got Rayanne Santos, who had quite a big career on the regional scene, ends up losing on the contender series to Denise Gomes. Goes 3-0 back on the regional scene, becoming a champion on the regional scene. And so far, since coming back to the UFC, she's 0-2. Both losses by split decision. Going to be taking on Ardelean, who has kind of only been signed to the UFC because of the questionable content she posts on Instagram, if you know, and if you've seen it. But yeah, she had quite a terrible start to her MMA career. Ended up losing to Zhang Weili as well. Kind of picked it up as she got a couple of wins on her belt. Managed to win a couple of belts on the regional scene as well. And so far, again, she's 0-2 on the regional scene with 2 losses. So it's low-level women MMA. Anything can happen at this point. But I'm going to go with Rayanne Santos. I'm not really sure how Ardelean's still in the UFC. She lost to Shauna Bannon, and even though it was a close fight, Shauna Bannon's by no means a high-level fighter, even though she just finished Puja Tomar. And I'm just not really know the potential of Ardelean. Rayanne Santos, she's had competitive fights before, like the one with Denise Gomes, and with the role that Denise Gomes on right now, that is actually quite a loss at his age kind of well. And even the one with Allan as well, who's an amazing grappler, she was able to go the distance too. So I just think that Rayanne Santos is the better fighter. I think she's a better grappler, better striker. Not too much to the point where I think she's going to get a finish, but I'm going to go with Rayanne Santos to win this one by decision. She's been facing better competition. She's been performing better against that competition. She's just not really been able to get the win, so I'm going to go Rayanne Santos by decision. We then have Marquel Moderos against Bolaji. Marquel Moderos had a pretty smooth career on the regional scene, gets a really good knockout on the contender series, and so far in the UFC, he's 2-0 with both wins coming by way of decision. He takes on Bolaji, who lost his professional debut, but after that went on a massive winning streak, becoming a champion on the local scene. Got a good finish on the contender series and managed to win in his UFC debut against Kimi Kwamba, but in his last fight, he got choked out cold in Paris against Chris Duncan. I'm going to go with Marquel Moderos to win this one by decision. Bolaji is just a failed prospect. He went out there against Chris Duncan, and he was winning that fight, but then he got taken. Well, I think he took down Chris Duncan, then got caught in a guillotine and got choked out cold. And Marquel Moderos, I remember his last fight with Austin Hubbard was really boring because it was kind of just Austin Hubbard kind of clinging on to Marquel Moderos, but I will say he is a pretty slick striker. We saw it in the contender series, he looked really good there, and even in the fight with Austin Hubbard, he was picking him apart on the feet in the third round, especially with the leg kicks. There's a nice rangy striker is Marquel Moderos, so I think stylistically this is quite a bad matchup for Bolaji. I don't think there's going to be much grappling involved in this fight, and I think when it does come to the striking, Marquel Moderos has shown me that he's got more potential, he's a lot more rangier than Bolaji, so I can see him picking him apart and getting a decision win. So I'm going to go with Marquel Moderos to win this one by decision. Again, I'm not really going to label either of these guys as our prospect. Bolaji hasn't really lived up to the hype. Marquel Moderos hasn't really been putting the stamp on his wins. His fight with Austin Hubbard was very close, but I reckon we'll get this one done. He's been a lot more active as well. Marquel Moderos, I think he picks apart Bolaji, gets a decision win. Marquel Moderos by decision. Then we've got the return of Jordan Leavitt as he takes on Kurt Holobaugh. The definition of active versus inactive, because I think Kurt Holobaugh fought like 2 months ago, and Jordan Leavitt's been out since 2023. But Jordan Leavitt, really good career on the regional scene with pretty much nothing but finishes. Gets a good finish on the contender series as well. Goes 3-1 in his first 4 fights in the UFC, until he runs into Paddy Pimblett. He obviously has that infamous fight with Paddy Pimblett where he gets choked out and then gets teabagged after losing to Paddy Pimblett. Since then, he goes out there and gets a brutal knee finish, and in his last fight in December 2023, he got choked out by Mr. Chase Hooper himself. We're going to be taking on Kurt Holobaugh, who's had quite a weird career when it comes to MMA. He had a really nice run on the regional scene, ended up fighting in the UFC where he lost. He then goes back to the regional scene, goes on a bit of a run, becoming a champion on the local scene, gets out a no contest on the contender series, goes 0-3 in the UFC, ends up getting finished by Barcelos and Shane Burgos. So he goes back to the regional scene, gets 2 wins, comes on the Ultimate Fighter, goes 3-0 with 3 finishes, ends up winning the Ultimate Fighter, and so far in his new UFC run, he's 1-2 as he's coming off a loss to Alexander Hernandez early this year. So he's had a bit of a weird run in the UFC's Kurt Holobaugh. I'm going to go with Jordan Leavitt to win this one. We just saw Kurt Holobaugh get out-grappled for 15 minutes by Alexander Hernandez, who isn't really known for his grappling. He's now approaching the age of 40 as well, and Jordan Leavitt, he's just a much better grappler. I think there's going to be a grappling masterclass from Jordan Leavitt, taking Kurt Holobaugh down and controlling him. Probably does it in more dominant fashion than what we just saw Alexander Hernandez do to Kurt Holobaugh as well. When it comes to the striking aspect of it, I know Jordan Leavitt lacks the striking, but it's not like he's necessarily a bad striker. He's just like an awkward striker, like an Aljamain Sterling. So I reckon he'll hold his own undefeated, and I think it's going to be a pretty clear unanimous decision to Jordan Leavitt. In his last loss, 2 losses, were to Paddy Pimblett, who's now on a complete roll in the lightweight division, and Chase Hooper, who's also on a roll. You know, he's on a massive winning streak. So it isn't like Jordan Leavitt's losing to bums. Kurt Holobaugh barely scraping the UFC, got beaten by another grappler in Trey Ogden, got beaten by another grappler, a striker in Alexander Hernandez by the grappling. So I think Jordan Leavitt gets this one done. Dominant grappling performance. Jordan Leavitt gets this one done by decision. We then have Andreas Gustaffson taking on Trevin Giles. I think it was supposed to be Jeremiah Wells who was supposed to be taking Andreas Gustaffson, but he's not related to Alexander Gustaffson before anybody asked, but he has had a massive run on the regional scene as Andreas Gustaffson with a bunch of finishes. Got a good finish on the Contender Series. He's kind of known for having a very chaotic and wild style. He was supposed to fight Preston Parsons, but I'm pretty sure he broke his neck early that last year, so he couldn't end up taking Preston Parsons. He's going to be taking on Trevin Giles, who had a nice run in the regional scene, ended up beating the likes of Rayanne Spann and Brendan Allen. So far in the UFC, he's just been an extremely streaky fighter. He put together a win streak, then he put together a lose streak. So he's just a really streaky fighter. Has got a good win over Roman Dolidze, but has also been finished a few times by the likes of Mr. Dricus du Plessis himself, Michael Morales, and a couple of other guys like Carlos Prates and Bonfim. So he's been finished quite a few times. Not the most consistent fighter as Trevin Giles. This is a tough fight to debut against for Andreas Gustaffson because Trevin Giles, he didn't look too bad against Carlos Prates. He made it competitive against Mike Mallet. He's a lot more experienced than a guy like Gustaffson, but I am going to go with Gustaffson to win this one by KO in the second round. Gustaffson's just like a kill-or-be-killed fighter. Very, very wild style. Hits like an absolute truck from what we've seen in the regional scene in the Contender Series. So I think we are going to see Andreas Gustaffson put Trevin Giles in deep water. If anybody's going to get a decision win, I can see this going to Trevin Giles just because of the, the fundamentals. He's got a nice jab. I'd say he's probably more technical than Andreas Gustaffson, but he's impressed me on the regional scene as Gustaffson. I think he's got a lot more potential than Trevin Giles. I think he's a lot more dangerous than Trevin Giles. So I think I'm going to see Andreas Gustaffson go out there and get a finish around the second round. I'm going to go second round KO for Andreas Gustaffson against Trevin Giles. Clips him with a massive right hand. Goes for the ground and pound finish because he is a very wild and exciting fighter as Gustaffson. So I'm going to go Gustaffson by KO in the second round. Then we have Billy Ray Goff versus Ramiz Brahimaj. Now, this is, I think, another short notice fight. It was supposed to be Auburn Elliott versus Brahimaj, which would have been a banger, but we've got Billy Ray Goff instead, who was supposed to be on the card anyway. Now, Billy Ray Goff, a nice run on the regional scene, managed to become a double champ on the regional scene, ends up winning on the Contender Series by first round KO, gets a good finish in his UFC debut, but he is coming off a loss in his most recent fight to Trey Waters by decision. He's going to be taking on Ramiz Brahimaj, who also had a nice run in the regional scene with nothing but finishes, and he's just the definition of a win-loss fighter. Since his UFC career, he's gone loss, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, win. He is just a streaky win-loss fighter. Every time he wins, he'll come back with a finish, but he is coming off a good win, a good knockout as well over Mickey Gall, which is kind of different because we usually used to see Brahimaj grappling and having a heavy grappling approach, but I'm going to go with Billy Ray Goff to win this one by TKO in the second round. Yeah, Brahimaj is, like I said, he's just a very inconsistent fighter, and Billy Ray Goff has shown on the Contender Series and in his UFC debut that he's got a good kind of style of keeping the fight standing. So I think we're going to see Billy Ray Goff keep this fight standing, and he's a much better and a much more dangerous striker than Brahimaj as well, and Billy Ray Goff likes to bring it as well. He's a very, kind of like I said with Andreas Gustaffson earlier, he likes to bring the pressure, likes to put the pressure on people, so I think he's going to put the pressure on Ramiz Brahimaj, and I'm just not a massive fan of Brahimaj as striker, and I know we just knocked out Mickey Gall, but Mickey Gall was never a high-level fighter. He's lost to the likes of Colt McGee as well, which in 2023 is not a good loss, so I'm going to go with Billy Ray Goff. I think he's a better striker. When it comes to grappling, that's where Brahimaj has the advantage, but I don't see him being able to take down a guy like Billy Ray Goff. I think he's going to keep the fight standing, and around the second round, gets the TKO over Brahimaj. And on top of that as well, we know that Brahimaj doesn't really have a good gas tank, so I feel like the later on the fight goes, it's only going to favour Billy Ray Goff, so I'm going to go Billy Ray Goff to win this one by TKO in the second round against Brahimaj. Just a better striker, keeps the fight standing, clips him, and we'll get the finish. Then we've got Ketlen Vieira versus Macy Chiasson. Now, Ketlen Vieira, again, really good run in the regional scene, undefeated on the regional scene, wins her first 3 fights in the UFC, ends up getting brutally finished by Irene Aldana, then goes 2-1 in the next 3 fights, ends up headlining a fight night against Holly Holm, where she wins a very controversial decision, and since then, she has now gone 1-2 in her most recent fight, where she's lost to none other than Mrs. I mean, I guess you can kind of call her both Mrs. and Mr. But Kayla Harrison in her most recent fight going to be taking on Macy Chiasson, who went 2-0 on the regional scene before immediately going on the Ultimate Fighter. Went 3-0 in the Ultimate Fighter with 3 finishes, ended up winning the tournament. Then after that, she went 4-1 in the next 5 fights in the UFC, got finished by Raquel Pennington, ended up losing to Raquel Pennington. Then after that, she's gone 3-1 in the last couple of fights, with her last 2 fights being a doctor stoppage win of Amara Bueno Silva and a Kianzad by rear naked choke. It's a tough fight to pick because Macy Chiasson, it's hard to kind of gauge how good Macy Chiasson is because I feel like she does struggle with grapplers a lot, and that win over Mara Bueno Silva has been losing left, right, and centre recently, and even in that loss, it was a doctor stoppage loss. We saw Pennington get her out of there. We saw Aldana put the pace on Macy Chiasson, so I think I'm actually going to go with Ketlen Vieira to win this one. She was able to hold her own against Kayla Harrison. She's quite one of the muscly women MMA fighters is Ketlen Vieira. She was able to hold her own against Kayla Harrison. She was able to keep the fight standing and avoid submissions, and we've seen before, like in the fight with Holly Holm and Misha Tate as well, that she's been able to kind of come with that heavy grappling approach. So I think we're going to see Ketlen Vieira with a heavy grappling game plan in this fight with Macy Chiasson. I think she's going to get her against the cage a lot, kind of wear her out across 15 minutes, maybe take her down a few times, and I just don't think we're going to see a striking masterclass from Macy Chiasson. I think it's going to be a lot of Ketlen Vieira holding her up against the cage, taking her down, just trying to rack up control time. Yeah, I'm going to go Ketlen Vieira to win this one. I think she gets this one done by decision, even though if anybody's going to get a submission, it's most likely to be Macy Chiasson. I think the grappling and just the size of well of Ketlen Vieira compared to Macy Chiasson, I think Ketlen Vieira is just going to outmuscle her, get the decision win by holding her against the cage and implementing the grappling. Then we've got Allan Nascimento versus Jafel Filho, pretty much two guys who are identical in the flyweight division. You've got Allan Nascimento, a shoot box fighter with the likes of obviously Charles Oliveira and the other guys at shoot box. Very heavy submission fighter, most of his wins by submission. He had a massive run on the regional scene, ended up losing on the Contender Series, and then also losing his UFC debut to Tagir Ulanbekov, but since then he's managed to go 2-0 in the UFC, beating Jake Hadley and Carlos Hernandez. Now he's going to be taking on Jafel Filho, again, a guy with another heavy submission and get base. Another guy with a massive run in the regional scene as well, managed to become a champion on the regional scene. Got a good finish on Dana White's Contender Series. Then he faces Makive in his debut, who nearly got Makive out of there. He had a massive knee ball locked in, was a second away from getting Makive out of there, but ultimately fell short to Muhammad Makive. And since then, he's 2-0 in the UFC with 2 submissions. He also had a grappling match with Amir Albazi last year, where he was able to beat Amir Albazi, which is impressive. They're pretty much identical fighters. This one could go either way. If you are a betting man, I wouldn't recommend betting on this fight, but I'm going to go with Allan Nascimento to win this one by decision. I just feel like he's a better grappler and better all-round fighter than Jafel Filho. I think if anybody's going to win the fight standing, it's going to be Allan Nascimento. I know he comes from Shoot Box. He's not particularly known for his striking style compared to a lot of the guys from Shoot Box, but I do think he has the striking advantage over Jafel Filho. And I think if anybody's the more dangerous submission artist, it is Allan Nascimento. So I think we're going to see Nascimento try and keep the fight standing, and if he has success with that, I think he's going to be able to pick apart Jafel Filho across 15 minutes. And even in the grappling exchanges, I feel like if there's any guy who's more dangerous with the grappling, it is going to be Allan Nascimento. So I'm going to go Nascimento. I think decision is probably the safe option, if not maybe submission, but I'm going to go Allan Nascimento by decision against Jafel Filho. Jafel Filho, again, another good submission artist, but hasn't really been beating the highest level fighters in the UFC. Daniel Perez, I think he's been cut from the UFC now, and Odi Osborne's a win-loss fighter. So I'm going to go Allan Nascimento, wins this one by decision. I just think he's better everywhere the fight goes than Jafel Filho, and he's going to pick up a decision win. We then have a fight that you can kind of guarantee is going to end in some sort of finish. Zachary Reese versus Dusko Todovoric. Now, Zachary Reese had a massive run in the regional scene. He had a 100% first-round finish rate, and he continued as he went in the Contender Series and got an armbar finish. He got slam KO'd in his UFC debut by Cody Brundage, who got KO'd by slam. Then he ends up getting 2 straight finishes in the UFC. His next 2, well, 1 straight finish and another decision, but 2-0 in his next 2 fights in the UFC. And in his last fight early this year at UFC 311, he got brutally finished by none other than Mr. Azamat Bekaev. Going to be taking on Dusko Todovoric, a guy with another undefeated run on the regional scene. Ended up becoming a champion. Also beat Michel Pereira on the regional scene. Ends up getting a decision win on the Contender Series, followed up by finishing his UFC debut. Then he ends up going 0-2 in his next 2 fights, getting knocked out by Soriano. Gets a good finish against Patolo in his next fight, gets knocked out by Chidi Njokwani. And then in his next fight, gets a good finish, and now he's 0-2 in his last 2, and in his most recent fight has been brutalized by Mansour Abdul Malik. So we get a bit of a stringy win-loss fighter, is Dusko Todovoric. They're both kind of similar fighters though, both dangerous on the feet, both kind of chinny, but I'm going to go with Zachary Reese to win this one by KO in the first round. Dusko Todovoric, he's lost 3 of his last 4 fights and might be one of the most chinny fighters in the UFC right now. And I know that Zachary Reese isn't really known for his chin, but if you take away the bad chin, he is a pretty solid fighter. He's got good grappling, he's striking, his rangy striking is good as well. He's dangerous on the feet. He's pretty much dangerous everywhere the fight goes. This Zachary Reese, which is why he's nearly got a 100% finishing rate in all of his wins. Dusko Todovoric, decent striker. Grappling isn't the best. Very, like I said before, bad chin. I just trust that Zachary Reese is going to get this one done by KO in the first round. I think if anybody's the more technical striker, it is going to be Zachary Reese. If anybody's got more ways to win, it is going to be Zachary Reese. I think he's got a lot more potential than Dusko Todovoric. And I know Zachary was got brutally KO'd early this year by Azamat Bekayev, but you've also got Dusko Todovoric, who got brutally KO'd late last year by Abdul Malik. So I'm going to go Zachary Reese by KO in the first round. Again, not a fight that are necessarily worth betting on, but I can guarantee it's not going to go the distance. Two guys with a bad chin, two guys who are very dangerous. I just think that Zachary Reese is more dangerous everywhere the fight goes. He's going to clip Dusko Todovoric and get the KO in the first round. We've then got Dustin Jacoby against Bruno Lopez. Dustin Jacoby actually came from Glory Kickboxing. He was actually a kickboxer before MMA, ended up getting knocked out by Alex Pereira as well. Comes over to MMA, has a nice little run in the regional scene, becoming a champion, gets a good win on the Contender Series, then goes and puts together quite a good winning streak in the UFC. Ends up running into Khalil Roundtree, loses a decision to Khalil Roundtree, then loses to Azamat Mirzakhanov. Then after that, now in his past couple of fights, he's now gone 2-2 in his last 4 fights, and in his most recent fight, he's brutally knocked out Vitor Petrino. Last year. He's going to be taking on Bruno Lopez. Went a nice undefeated run with pretty much only finishers on the regional scene, becoming a champion as well. Gets finished on the Contender Series by Brenton Ribeiro. Then gets another good win in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Goes back to the Contender Series, gets a good finish on the Contender Series, and he won his most recent fight against Magomed Gadzhizulov as a massive underdog as well. Bruno Lopez is a weird fighter. He's a very clinch-heavy fighter. He showed that in the fight with Magomed Gadzhizulov. Likes grinding you against the cage. He has got pretty powerful hands, but he's not the highest-paced fighter. And again, I think he's one of these fighters that looks really good in the regional scene, but then when he steps up to the top competition, he kind of falls short. I'm going to go Dustin Jacoby to win this one by decision, simply because he's just shown that he's a lot more UFC-worthy and there's a lot more experience than Bruno Lopez. Former Glory Kickboxing fighter. He's fought a shit ton of guys in the UFC, and like I said before, Bruno Lopez, his gas tank was awful in his most recent fight. He hasn't really impressed me so far in the UFC against Magomed Gadzhizulov. Got finished by Brenton Ribeiro as well. I feel like Dustin Jacoby is the infinitely better striker than Bruno Lopez. I can see him picking apart Bruno Lopez in this fight. And if the fight stays standing across 15 minutes, I really do think we're going to see Dustin Jacoby maybe get Bruno Lopez out of there. But I feel like they're both a little bit too tentative, especially Dustin Jacoby. Even in his most recent fight against Vitor Petrino, he managed to clip Vitor Petrino, but outside of him knocking him out, it was a fairly uneventful, low-output fight. And Bruno Lopez, I think his game plan in this fight is to kind of grind him against the cage and take him down, which is easier said than done because Dustin Jacoby has got pretty decent takedown defense. So I think Dustin Jacoby keeps the fight standing, picks apart Bruno Lopez, gets a pretty clear, unanimous decision win. So I'm going to go Dustin Jacoby by decision against Bruno Lopez. We've then got Mateusz Gamrot against Ludovic Klein. Kind of weird matchmaking, but I'm not going to complain. Mateusz Gamrot's been looking for a fight. Ludovic Klein deserves somebody in the top 15, so I'm going to go... Well, we're starting off with Mateusz Gamrot. Now, Mateusz Gamrot had a massive run outside the UFC in KSW. He had a huge run in KSW, becoming a double champion, loses his UFC debut to Guram Kutadladze, and then after that goes 3-0 his next couple of fights. Main event against Arman Tsarukyan and beats Arman Tsarukyan himself. Then he loses to Beneil Dariush. After that, goes 3-0 in his next couple of fights, and in his most recent fight, he had a Fight of the Year contender at UFC 305, where he lost a controversial decision to Dan Hooker. Going to be taking on Ludovic Klein, another guy who had quite a big run on the regional scene, had a massive KO in his UFC debut, then went on a 2-fight losing streak in the featherweight division and ended up getting finished by Nate Landwehr as well. But since that, moving up to 155, has been in an absolute roll. He had a good one over Baja Mondes as well back in 2023, so he seemed to put it together as Ludovic Klein. He seems to have managed to find his bearings, but I'm going to go with Mateusz Gamrot to win this one by decision. Ludovic Klein, people like to talk about how Ludovic Klein's underrated, and, you know, he's this underrated guy, and I guess you're not wrong. But the reason he's underrated is because he's not really shown why, you know, he's not really, like, put the stamp in any of his wins. Like, for example, his most recent win against Roosevelt Roberts. Roosevelt Roberts has lost, like, 5 of his last 6 fights, and he had a very close competitive fight with Roosevelt Roberts. The one with Jai Herbert as well, going to a draw with Jai Herbert. I know he had that good win over Baja Mondes, but Baja Mondes is still fairly untested in the 155 rankings, so even though Ludovic Klein definitely deserves someone in the top 15, and I guess you can class him as a prospect, he hasn't been looking amazing against these regional guys. And Mateusz Gamrot, I think he's just... I think we're going to see a grappling masterclass. He's one of the best wrestlers in this division, is Gamrot, apart from maybe Makhachev. And I mean, you could argue that he's better than Tsarukyan because of the fact that he was able to beat Tsarukyan in the fact that they had. So he's definitely one of the best wrestlers in this division. So I feel like we're going to see Gamrot be able to land a couple of takedowns in this fight against Ludovic Klein, get the control time, kind of grind him out. And don't get me wrong, Ludovic Klein has amazing takedown defense as well, but he's displaying that takedown defense against much lower level fighters. On the feet, I guess you want to favor Ludovic Klein to win this fight, but you can't even count out Mateusz Gamrot on the feet as well. It's not like he's looked awful on the feet in the UFC. So So I'm going to go with Gamrot. He's been facing, much higher level guys. He's made it competitive with the likes of Sarukian. He should have arguably beat Dan Hooker as well. He should be on a 4-fight winning streak. And Ludovic Klein, he's been facing unranked guys. Hasn't really been lucky dominant in them as well. So I just trust that Mateusz Gamrot gets this one done. I'm going to go Mateusz Gamrot to get this one done by decision. Where's Ludovic Klein at with the grappling? A lot of holding him against the cage, taking him down. And I reckon he's going to be able to hold his own on the feet. So I'm going to go Mateusz Gamrot in this fight by decision. And then the main event, Erin Blanchfield versus Macy Barber. Potential title eliminator. I know we've got Natalia Silva in the wings as well, but the winner of this fight could potentially challenge Shevchenko for a belt in the future. Erin Blanchfield went 3-0 on the regional scene, ended up losing to Tracy Cortez. I don't know how Tracy Cortez is such a shit fighter, but still has so many golden wins on her resume. Anyway, after that, she goes on another 3-fight winning streak on the regional scene. Comes over to the UFC, has a massive winning streak on the UFC, ends up finishing the likes of JJ Aldrich, Molly McCann, and then she gets a good win over Jessica Andrade as well. Headlines a fight night against Vieira, ends up losing that fight to Vieira, and she bounced back in the most recent fight. She was able to beat Rose Namajunas. Going to be taking on Macy Barber, who had a nice 4-0 run on the regional scene. Gets a good finish on the Contender Series, followed up by another finish, and another finish. She was on a roll in the UFC, ends up losing 2 in a row to Roxanne and Alexa Grasso, and since then she's put together another massive winning streak, including a good finish over Amanda Ribas back in 2023. It's a tough one because Macy Barber, she's been looking amazing in the last couple of fights. She's a very high-paced fighter, and she's a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter for the division. She can grapple, she can wrestle. She's also got a good high-pace striking matchup, but I feel like Erin Blanchfield, I mean, it's a classic grappler versus striker matchup, but I'm going to go with Erin Blanchfield to win this one. She has got really good grappling, does Erin Blanchfield. We saw it in the fight with obviously Molly McCann, Jessica Andrade, Talia Santos as well. That her grappling is legit, and Macy Barber, don't get me wrong, she's also got good wrestling, but I feel like the grappling, the friendship between the two of them is just too big. I do think we are going to see Erin Blanchfield out-wrestle Macy Barber for most of this fight, and even on the feet, Erin Blanchfield looked good in the most recent fight against Rose Namajunas. Apart from when she was holding her against the cage, when they were striking, Erin Blanchfield was arguably doing a lot better on the feet against Rose Namajunas. So I do think she's becoming a lot more well-rounded as Erin Blanchfield. She's really shown improvements to her game, and Macy Barber, she's just not been the most active fighter. She's had a shit ton of pullouts, and even though she's well-rounded, I feel like apart from maybe the striking, which might even be debatable, she just isn't better anywhere the fight goes than Erin Blanchfield. So I'm going to go with Erin Blanchfield to win this one by decision. I just think she wears out Macy Barber with the wrestling, and I think she can hold her own and potentially even beat Macy Barber on the feet. So I'm going to go with Erin Blanchfield to win this one, and potentially maybe if she wins this one, she might be fighting Shevchenko for a belt, or we'll have to see. Maybe they do Shevchenko versus Zhang Weili and Natalia Silva versus Blanchfield, I'm not sure, but I'm going to go Erin Blanchfield to win this one by decision. Now, if I had to rank all my picks by confidence, my high confidence picks are going to be Mateusz Gamrot, Dustin Jacoby, Billy Ray Goff, Jordan Leavitt, Marquel, Moderos. Those are the ones I'm very confident with. Medium confidence, we've got Erin Blanchfield, Zachary, Reese, Andreas, Gustaffson, and Rayanne Santos. I do think they're going to win, but I wouldn't bet the house on it. And then low confidence could honestly be 50-50. It's Ketlen, Vieira, and Allan Nascimento, where it is a very close fight and obviously not worth betting on. If we had to do some bonus/award predictions, so who do I think are going to get the bonuses in this card? I did pretty accurate in the last Apex card. I think I got most of the bonuses right. I think the first bonus of the card is going to go to Zachary Reese. Like I said in the prediction, these guys, both Dusko, Todovoric, and Zachary Reese, there's no way this fight goes the distance. Both have terrible gins. Both tend to be quite dangerous, but I just feel like Zachary Reese is kind of like a new breed of the middleweight division compared to Dusko Todovoric. He's a lot more technical on the feet than Todovoric. He's also much a better grappler. So I think we're going to see Zachary Reese land that massive shot on Todovoric, who's got an awful chin, slumps Todovoric out cold, and I think we're going to see Zachary Reese get another performance bonus. I also think the second bonus is going to go to Andreas Gustaffson. If you've seen Gustaffson on the regional scene, he just throws the kitchen sink at people. He's one of the most wild, chaotic, dangerous strikers. Kind of like a kill or be killed fighter, but he's actually got underrated defense as well. I think he's going to go out there and finish Trevin Giles at some point in this fight, and therefore I think he's going to get a performance bonus. And I also think Billy Ray Goff is going to knock out Brahimaj in this fight. Brahimaj, terrible gas tank, not the best striker, decent grappler, but he's just not consistent enough. Billy Ray Goff's going to keep the fight standing, knock out Brahimaj, and I think from that is going to get a performance bonus. Now, the prospect of the card that I'll be looking out for is none other than Mr. Ludovic Klein. Ludovic Klein's kind of been silently working in the lightweight division. He's not really had any crazy wins as of yet, but he's been putting together a winning streak, and he does deserve somebody in the top 15. If he can go out there and beat Mateusz Gamrot, he's gone from a guy that nobody really knows of to being in the top 10 and potentially a top contender in this division. So I'd say the prospect to look out for on this card is Ludovic Klein. Klein. The fight of the night, in my opinion, is going to be Gamrot versus Klein. I'm really interested in this fight. You've got a fun wrestler in Mateusz Gamrot, who has got kind of decent striking against, obviously, Ludovic Klein, who's a really good striker with elite takedown defense. So I'm interested to see the clash of styles. I think we're going to have a good grappler versus striker matchup. And they've both been on a roll as well. So I think that could be fight of the night. And then I think the snooze fest of the night, the worst fight on the card, is going to be Ketlen Vieira versus Macy Chiasson. I just think it's going to be Ketlen Vieira holding Macy Chiasson against the cage, kind of wearing her out with her size, having a very grappling performance. I just don't think there's going to be much going on in this fight. I don't see it ending in some sort of stoppage. I don't see there being any crazy moments in this fight. I think Ketlen Vieira gets this one done by a bit of a clinch fest points decision. But those are my picks for Erin Blanchfield versus Macy Barber. Quite a weak fight night Apex card, but luckily, after this card, the summer of the UFC starts and we have a shit ton of good cards coming up. But let me know your thoughts on this card. If you agree or disagree with the predictions, let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.